I do not have a bald spot, but people who do have to get Velcro in order to keep it on their head. That was a joke. I moved down to San Diego in 2009 after I received my rabbinic ordination, and we came down primarily for my wife to work at Rady Children's Hospital, where she was until recently a pediatric gastroenterologist, and now she has her own private practice. And I was casting about for things that I loved to do, and I was very happy to receive a call from USD that they are inviting me to come and teach Jewish thought.
So I was born Jewish. I'm from San Diego, and I was born and raised in a modern Orthodox household. So my family were like very we were very active in the Jewish community, and we did a lot of like the typical things like keeping the Sabbath and like keeping kosher and that kind of stuff. So that was always a big part of me growing up as a child, and learning about like the Jewish community and being with my family. So.
Okay, so I've been working in Jewish nonprofit for 24 years, and I've been with Hillel, which is the Jewish Student Union. Hillel is actually on 550 campuses in the country, and I've been with Hillel for 11 years, and Hillel has been at USD for 3. This is our 3rd year, and we are delighted to be here. So I'm the director, and I work with the students.
So the kippah is a piece of cloth or a piece of satin or a piece of really any kind of fabric that is generally put on top of a man's head. It is almost entirely cultural and sociological, and it doesn't have any roots in the Bible. It doesn't have any roots in Jewish law as a legal requirement per se, but it's what was done, and so it's a tradition, it's a custom, and it also signifies which group the guy belongs to. So this kind of yarmulke is usually worn by, yarmulke is the Yiddish word, kippah is the Hebrew word. I go by the Hebrew usually. So this kind of kippah is usually worn by men who support the existence of the state of Israel and are observant. There are other kinds of kippot, which is the plural of kippah, that are worn by people who don't attach any religious significance to the state of Israel or even oppose the state of Israel. So by knowing what kind of, once you're on the inside, if you know what kind of kippah someone has, you'll be able to kind of know a little bit about their politics.
So the kippah, it's a pretty old tradition, and basically the main significance of it that I've learned and that it means to me is that it's basically meant to, when you wear it, it's meant to show that there's a power higher than you, and it's meant to kind of show that to kind of try to make yourself humble and to be able to recognize that God's above you and everything's ultimately up to Him. So it's kind of like it's a big sign of faith, and also to be able to have faith that everything's going to be all right at the end, and just to acknowledge that there's a higher power beyond just yourself.
Okay, so the kippah is a covering. You cover your head to honor God, and for many people it's a reminder that when you are wearing it, there's somebody above you and that you should be a moral and ethical person. As a female, I am not obligated to wear a kippah, and I do not wear one, so it's really for males. But I have 2 brothers, and I go to bar and bat mitzvahs, and I actually brought a few to show, and whenever you go to these events, you cover your head. So I have a collection in my home for when people come over, but I don't wear one. I think when people wear a kippah, they definitely answered maybe to a higher power. I went to an all-girls school, and we wore school uniform, and for sure, when you're wearing school uniform, you behave differently than when you took it off. And I think the kippah is a reminder that you have someone to answer to. Some people only wear it when they say prayers or blessings or when they pray, but some people wear it all the time, and I think it helps you to be a better person. As a Jew, I feel like there's certain things you're obligated to try and be a better person, to think of everybody, to treat people equally, to always be a light unto the nations, to make sure we are held to a higher standard. And I think when one wears a kippah, that's a reminder that you should be doing and thinking.
So one of the reasons I wear a kippah is because it outs me as a Jew. And for those of us who have the need for reminders to be nice and kind and patient, this helps me to be nice and kind and patient, and I need those reminders throughout the day because I may sometimes have a tendency to not be nice, kind, or patient. So I don't want my misbehavior to be a reflection of how Jews act in the world. So on a very personal level, this helps keep me in check. I don't think this has anything to do with my relationship to God per se, except that I believe that I am in better touch with God when I am kinder and more compassionate. So in that sense, it is an indirect route to living a more righteous life.
So it's interesting, I brought a few different examples. It is said that Orthodox and different aspects of Judaism wear different types of kippah. So the crocheted kippah is said to be for Zionists, and the silky one is for Reform Jews, and then the leather one. So each one is different, but you can also get really funky ones. And sometimes women do wear them. So depending on which of these are on your head, it tells you about what type of Jew you are, which you follow, if you're religious or more spiritual. So it's a symbol for what type of Jew you are.
It definitely does not connect me to people in my community because I am not Orthodox. So 9 out of 10 dentists surveyed who wear kippot are Orthodox. And they're looking at me, thinking I'm Orthodox, thinking that we share a whole host of practices that we don't hold. So outside of the Orthodox world, there are just a handful of men in the Reform and conservative world, and I'm a conservative rabbi, who wear the kippah. So at one level, I know that I've got some practices that overlap with all other guys who wear kippot, but in terms of our ideology, the vast majority of people who wear kippot are Orthodox, which I am not, and I have a chip on my shoulder against. So it actually can sometimes be what you call in language a false friend.
So I usually wear it when I go to Jewish events, whether it would be some kind of gathering, meeting, a like Shabbat dinner or something like that, or like services, going to a synagogue. Whenever I pray, I wear it. In any of the holidays, I usually wear it. It's a big it's really an important thing for us to kind of like associate ourselves with the community when we wear it. So it's it's like a very important part of like what we do whenever we practice Judaism.
According to tradition, you're supposed to wear a kippah when you are praying, or when you are studying Torah, or when you are saying a blessing. And so I have some people in my life who keep the kippah in their pocket, and they take it out and put it on their head when they're doing one of those things. We live, thank God, in a country where I'm not embarrassed around keeping a kippah on my head all the time. I know some people who specifically like the size of the kippah to cover their bald spot. I don't have that issue at the moment, but so it serves different kinds of functions for different people.
For the Sabbath and for a meal, then you say prayers, you bless certain things, you do the wine and the what's called the challah, the bread and the candles, and then I will always offer the men in my house if they would like to borrow a kippah, and sometimes they forget to return it, but fortunately I have a big collection, so.
I started wearing a kippah regularly when I was in my late 20s as a way to signal to the opposite sex that I was observant, because I was interested in projecting an image of someone who kept the Sabbath and kept a certain kind of lifestyle. And so it was the kippah that was the easiest outward symbol of those acts.
I started when I was a little kid. My parents got me some, and I used to go to a Jewish day school. So when I was around there, we'd always wear it every day, throughout the entire day. And there's a lot of like different levels of different people. Some Jewish people wear it for their entire life, just every day, doing everything. For me, I typically don't do that, but I tend to do it like whenever I'm at Jewish events or stuff like that. So I basically for as long as I can remember, I've worn it.
Well, I grew up in South Africa where the majority of Jews were Orthodox. That was all there was. So it was just, my brothers always wore one when they went to services, and at home when we did the blessings on a Friday night. And then when I had my own home, I have daughters, so I didn't need it for them, but I just always wanted to have for guests and for people. I celebrate all the Jewish holidays, and I always offer people the opportunity to cover their heads if they want to. It's also kind of almost like a respect. It's interesting because in Western society you take your hat off as a respect, but in Judaism you cover your head because you are under God. So it's different.
In regards to how many I have, man, I probably, my family, we have a lot of them. It's kind of just like, it's like how many, it's just like any kind of clothing, like how many sunglasses you have lying around, or like how many shoes or something like that. It's just kind of just out of convenience. So if I were to estimate, I don't know, I'd probably say maybe around 10, something like that. But I kind of share it with my family, so yeah.
So, you know, I had a kippah when I was bar mitzvah at 13, and it was one of those, you know, black plastic ones that you get in a box at the synagogue. So I would say over my life I've had 20 or 30 kippot. I've got big ones and little ones. I don't wear a kippah inside the house, but when I go outside I always have my head covered. So whether that's with a cap or a hat, or a big round kippah when I'm having a bad hair day, or a smaller kippah, that depends on lots of different factors.
Oh, I have at least 100. Because when you go to a bar or bat mitzvah, then they usually have them out there, like it'll say the bar or bat mitzvah, the person's name in English and in Hebrew, and the date. So you usually take one, and then you have a memory of that person, and it's written inside, and weddings. So I have all of them, and then sometimes I'll buy funky ones, like this is from South Africa, it's made from Coca-Cola, and it's very different. So yeah, so I have at least 100. No, I guess nobody specific. We just grew up with many symbols in the house of Judaism. I mean, today in my house I have a mezuzah on every door, which is a symbol in the home. So no one specifically, no.
It was definitely taught to me by my dad, and also about like my early Judaics teachers in my school, and that basically what they explained to me was why I was originally saying that it's basically meant to remind you that there's a God above you, and you're meant to acknowledge that there's a higher power.
Well, no one had to teach me about a kippah because it's a practice that is still in play. And so you see people walking around, whether it's Los Angeles or whether it's even San Diego or Jerusalem, with head coverings. And as I mentioned, different head coverings represent different kinds of communities. So the history is very thin in the sense that these different kinds of kippot for the different kinds of communities are a function of the last couple of hundred years. Everybody in the past had their head covered. It was a sign of respect. And so you didn't start to get this differentiation of men wearing kippot for certain kinds of activities really until the 20th century in America. So most of the pictures you'll see of early 20th century American Jews out and about, their head isn't covered because they're not studying, they're not eating, they're not saying a blessing, they're not praying.
Yes, definitely. I mean, people will make fun of Jews sometimes who are walking to and from services. Lately, there's, anti-Semitism has surged, and people will taunt, or kids at school who wear a kippah. Sometimes the other kids make fun of them because they don't understand what it is, and they'll say, "Why do you have a beanie on your head?" Or they'll say inappropriate things because it's ignorance. They don't understand what it is.
Luckily, I haven't. There's definitely, I know a lot of stories from other people that there have been a lot of kind of anti-Semitic instances with it, that people say a lot of really crazy things. Like, for example, I once heard from my rabbi that he went to some city far out of San Diego, and there was this one this one guy that asked him, he's like, "Wait, can I is that a yarmulke? Are you an ancient Hebrew?" He's like, "Yeah." And then they're like, "Oh, okay, can you take off your yarmulke, please? Can I feel your head?" He's like, "What's this all about?" And then he started feeling his head, and then the guy was so confused that he didn't have any horns under his yarmulke. He was convinced that's what the yarmulke was for, and that was just pretty crazy. But luckily, personally for me, I haven't. I think if anything, it's really brought a sense of belonging for each of us within the Jewish community, and it's also really gained respect. We've gained a lot of respect from other people too when they see us being able to practice our religion and be able to wear our religious items out in the public without being afraid or having any shame or anything like that. So
I have had one or two misunderstandings, and those are interesting because I was not wearing a kippah like this. I was wearing a larger kippah, and I had several people assume I was Muslim, and they asked me if I was Muslim, and when I told them I wasn't, they walked away. In other words, they were hoping I was Muslim. These people, I imagine, were Muslims themselves. And so I was it's not that I was pretending, but they thought I was something that I wasn't. And in terms of generating or eliciting any kind of anti-Semitism, absolutely zero. I lived in the South, in Nashville, Tennessee for 4 years. Because religion is so important in Nashville, really the only thing I got was respect from people, and people would say nice things about Israel, and people would say shalom, and it was really just a source of positive interaction. And the same in California. Since I've been back, since I've been wearing a kippah, which I started when I was, in my late 20s. I didn't grow up wearing a kippah. It's really been a flag that says, hey, if you need to know where a kosher restaurant is, you can ask me. If you need to know where, the closest synagogue is, you can ask me. So there's really been, I have gotten a few bits of anti-Semitism in my life, but never when I was wearing a kippah.
I personally don't. I think that, within Judaism itself, it's not there really isn't meant to be any divisions with anything. It's meant to be kind of a kind of religion that accepts everyone who is Jewish equally. And it's also because a lot of people who are Jewish, they're born into being Jewish. The main aspect of Judaism is that if your mother is Jewish, then you're technically considered Jewish. it's like a heritage kind of thing. So you don't necessarily convert into it. You can if you want to, but a lot of it's more kind of like passed on from generation to generation. So because of that, whenever you're considered Jewish, it's everyone kind of is considered equal with it. So so basically the common tradition is for all men to be able to wear it. It's typically worn for men because it's believed that women don't need it, because women in Judaism are considered more like, they have like a holier aspect towards them than men do. So that's why there's a lot of things that men have to do that women don't have to do. And that's like an example. Another example is like wearing, I don't know if you guys have heard of tefillin. That's like another object. It's basically a thing that you wrap around your arm and you put it on your head, and you wear that whenever you pray. And that's something that men do as well, to kind of like try to boost their spirituality. But besides for that, I'd say, yeah, it's a thing that everyone really does, and it really kind of helps everyone feel that they're all in it together within the community.
I think it could, because it's a symbol. I mean, it's interesting because if you see a man with a kippah, then you know the man is Jewish, whereas with Muslims, you know the woman has a hijab, you know when the woman is Jewish. So, the woman is Muslim. So, as a Jewish woman, I don't have signs showing I'm Jewish. Well, I'm wearing a Star of David, but normally I wouldn't have a sign. So it's only the Jewish men that are seen as Jewish because they wear a kippah. So I think there could be misunderstandings and ignorance, but then again, you would hope that somebody might see it as a positive and take the opportunity to engage and to ask questions and to learn more about the religion. So I think it could go either way, but it definitely can be a source of discrimination and hatred, just because people don't know what it is.
Well, wearing a kippah obviously identifies me as a Jew, for those people who know, and I think most people in blue states know. I'm not sure about red states. You have relatively fewer Jews in the middle of the country. So to the degree that whatever it is you're doing is identifiable with a certain kind of social movement, then perhaps there's a social or political component. In terms of egalitarianism and gender identity, there are now a handful of women and people of indeterminate pronouns who want to also identify themselves as traditionally Jewish through a head covering. And outside of Orthodoxy, you'll sometimes see other kinds of folks besides men wearing a kippah. There are other things that men usually wear. I don't, but they're like a poncho with tassels. So it's very thin material. It's kind of like an undershirt. And it says in the book of Deuteronomy that you shall wear these fringes upon your garments. And so there are many, I would say the vast majority of Orthodox men do wear this undergarment. It's called a talit. And sometimes you'll get a guy that'll wear a talit with the fringes out who doesn't wear a kippah because, it's a smorgasbord of religious observances these days. And I imagine, although I don't know personally, I imagine that there are people who don't identify as binary or women who are also wearing a talit.
That's why I just brought a few different kinds, like the funky ones, and just so that you could get a sense of it. This is what some women wear, but then it's not a kippah. So yeah, let's just do these. Okay, so this is a crocheted kippah, which is worn by certain types of perhaps Zionist Jews. And then the velvet one is kind of old-fashioned, and you wouldn't really see these around today. The leather one is the cool kind. You get all sorts of nice leather ones. The satin kind are usually, they said, Reform Jews wear them. You'll find them like for free in a synagogue, or people give them out at bar mitzvahs and weddings. It's not something you would maybe buy in the store. And then you can get really funky modern ones. I'm from South Africa, and this one says crazy about Cape Town, which is where I'm from, so I just bought it because it's cute. And then you get the satin ones with a trim and without the trim. And it's unusual for women to wear around, but this is, if a woman, perhaps in a Reform synagogue, maybe conservative, would want to cover her head, that's what she would wear. And then this again is a satin one, but a nicer version. So that's it. And I just want to add one thing. So if a man has to cover his head and he's wearing like a baseball cap, then that's still a head covering. It doesn't have to be an actual kippah. If he's wearing a baseball cap or a black hat, that's still a head covering. It doesn't have to be a specific shape or of a specific material. The head is just covered. But the tradition is to wear just the round little skull cap or yarmulke or kippah as it is in Hebrew. Or some people just put it on when they say a blessing or prayer or over the food, or only when they go to services. And if somebody wears one all the time, but they're going for a job interview and they feel they'll be discriminated against, then it's fine to take it off.
I was going to bring several for an example. This is one of my smallest ones. There are even smaller that look like dollar-sized pancakes. I find those to be too small. I do not have a bald spot. But people who do have to get Velcro in order to keep it on their head. That was a joke. Okay.
That's good.
Okay.